Greetings and welcome to my video presentation on some basics of the t-test. My name is Fahima Basha. In this presentation, you will learn about the t-test, its purpose, when to apply it, how to apply it, as well as three types of t-test, which are single sample t-test, independent sample t-test, and the dependent sample t-test. Before we begin, a little background about the t-test. The t-test was introduced in 1908 by William Seeley Gossett for the quality of beer. Gossett published his work under the name Student. That's why the t-test is also called the Student t-test. Here are some keywords to become familiar with. Inferential statistics. Inferential statistics is used to make judgments about the population. The mean is the average. The sample is the set of data collected from statistical population. A population in statistics refers to the total number of observations that can be made. Assumptions are basically all statistical tests are performed based on a set of assumptions. When these assumptions are violated, the results of the analysis can be misleading. The variance is the measure between the spread between numbers in a data set. And dependent variables are basically the effect variables, while the independent variables is the cause. Finally, critical value is the point beyond which we reject the null. The purpose of the t-test is to find evidence of the difference between the means of two populations and to determine whether the difference is statistically significant. The following flowchart help in deciding which test to use. If we're comparing the means, then the following questions need to be asked. Are we comparing a sample mean with a population mean? If that's the case, then we use it, and the variance is known, then we use the z-test. If we're still comparing a sample mean and a population mean, but the variance is unknown, then that's where we use the one sample t-test. On the other hand, if we're comparing two sample means, then are the variables dependent or independent? In the case that the variables are independent, then we use the independent sample t-test. In the case that the variables are dependent, we use the paired, which is also another way for the dependent sample test. It is also worth mentioning that the t-test is always used in a sample size that's less than 30. Here are the t-test steps. First, we have to state the hypothesis. The null research hypothesis states that there is no difference between the mean. Second, we have to state the level of risk. This refers to the level of significance or error associated with the null hypothesis. Third, we have to select the test to be used, in this case, the t-test. Compute the value of the test statistics, which is also called the obtained value, using the appropriate formula. Step 5 is use the appropriate table of critical values. The t-value in this case will be used to reject the null hypothesis. And 6, we have to compare the value obtained with the critical value. Step 7 and 8 is where the decision is made. If the value obtained is greater than the critical value, the null hypothesis is rejected. If the value obtained is less than the critical value, the null hypothesis is the most logical explanation. There are three types of t-tests. Single sample t-test is used to determine if a sample comes from a population, while the independent sample t-test is used to compare two means from two independent groups. The dependent sample t-test, which is also called the paired sample t-test, is used to compare two means from two related groups. The following flowchart is a guideline on how to determine which t-test to use. As we could see here, we're always comparing groups. We have to decide if we're comparing many groups. If we're comparing only two groups, then we're going to use the t-test for the independent sample. The single sample t-test is used to determine if a sample comes from a population. It compares the single sample to the population mean, and with a known mean and an unknown variance. variance. The single sample formula is as follows. We subtract the sample mean and the population mean, and we divide by the sample standard deviation over the square root of the sample size. The independent sample t-test. The independent sample t-test evaluates the difference between the means of two unrelated groups. It is used to analyze a control and an experimental group. In an independent sample t-test, two variables need to be present, one independent and one dependent. There are some assumptions that needs to be made for the independent sample t-test. Assumption on independence, assumption of normality, and assumptions of homogeneity. The independent t-test formula is as follows. To compute it manually, the following data will be needed. The sum of the following of these scores, such as the mean of the groups, the scores, as well as the number of scores in each group. The dependent sample t-test, which is also called paired sample t-test, is used to compare two means from two related groups. It is used if the mean difference between the two groups is 0. There are also assumptions that need to be made when conducting a dependent sample t-test, which are that the dependent variable must be continuous, the observations are independent of one another, the dependent variable should be approximately normally distributed, and the dependent variable should not contain outliers. The dependent sample t-test is as follows, where D is the difference between the groups and N is the number of pairs of observations. Finally, we need to make an interpretation on the t-test. The effect size is used to measure how different two groups are from one another. The effect size is important when analyzing the t-test because it measures how different the two groups are from one another, and it uses a formula called Cohen's t, which is equal to the difference of the mean for the groups divided by the standard deviation. Here are some guidelines to follow when using Cohen's t. A smaller effect size ranges from 0.0 to 0.20. A medium size effect size ranges from 0.2 to 0.5. Anything over 0.5 has a large effect size. If the size is 0, it means that there is no difference between the groups and that the groups tends to be similar. As the effect size gets larger, the lack of overlap or similarity between the groups decreases. I think you're ready for some practice with SPSS. Tune in to my next video. Thanks for watching.